Let's think about this for a second. What if our current political moment, all the division and turmoil, isn't some historical accident? What if it's actually a destination, a place we've been building for decades? Today, we're diving into an analysis that says just that our reality is the result of a series of very deliberate choices.
So that really is the central question, isn't it? How in the world did we get here? This isn't about blaming random chance or bad luck. The analysis we're exploring today argues it's the result of a very specific and traceable chain of events and human decisions.
Think of it this way. Our present day is like a street address. The world we're living in, its political landscape, its social structures, that's the building standing right there at that address. And that building didn't just appear. It was designed and constructed by people. So to really understand why things are the way they are, we've got to look at the blueprints.
To see this idea in action, we're going to start with a really powerful story out of Poland. It's a story all about what happens when a country is suddenly forced to confront a really difficult, painful truth from its own past. Okay, so the whole thing was kicked off by a single book published back in 2000. It was called Neighbors. And the author, Jan Gross, he uncovered this horrible event from 1941 in a small town called Jedwabne. What he found was that it wasn't just the Nazis. Local Catholic Poles had actually rounded up their Jewish neighbors for the Nazis, which led to their mass murder. This completely shattered the national story Poland told itself about being purely victims during the war. Now, you've got to understand, the author's whole point wasn't to punish or to blame. It was about healing. The idea was simple, right? The only way a country can actually move forward is to acknowledge its mistakes and start an honest conversation. It was supposed to be a step towards reconciliation.
Yeah, that is not what happened. Not even close. Instead of kicking off a conversation about healing, that book ignited a total firestorm of denial, of anger, and of nationalist backlash. The reaction was immediate, it was fierce, and it sent the country in the exact opposite direction. And you can see the dominoes fall right here on this timeline. Just 1 year after the book came out, the Law and Justice Party was formed pretty much specifically to reject the book's findings. Then, in 2010, this tragic plane crash killed a huge chunk of Poland's government, which created a massive power vacuum. And by 2015, riding that wave of nationalist anger, the Law and Justice Party won an outright majority, and everything changed. And the consequences were huge. The new government moved fast to take over the media, to stack the courts with loyalists, basically removing any check on their power. They weren't shy about it either. They openly said they were pursuing an illiberal state, one that rejects core democratic values like protecting minority rights. And this led directly to a near-total ban on abortion and made Poland the worst-rated country in the entire EU for LGBTQ rights. A complete democratic U-turn, all sparked by a backlash to historical truth.
Okay, so you might be thinking, that's a story about Poland, what's that got to do with anything else? Well, this is where it gets interesting. The analysis we're looking at draws a straight line from that exact pattern, progress, then fierce backlash, to a pivotal moment in American history. Specifically, it points right to the period after the huge victories of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. The argument is that this incredible era of social progress didn't just happen in a vacuum. It triggered its own powerful political reaction, a backlash that would go on to completely reshape American politics for the next 50 years. I mean, just look at how fast things flipped. It's kind of stunning. In 1964, Lyndon Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act, and he wins the presidency in one of the biggest landslides ever. The country seemed to be on a clear path. But then, just 4 years later, Richard Nixon wins, and his whole campaign is seen as a direct rejection of that very same civil rights project. It was a massive whiplash-inducing reversal. So what on earth happened in those 4 years? Well, this analysis suggests that a critical number of voters started to see the expansion of rights as a zero-sum game. The thinking became, if they're gaining something, I must be losing something. And that mindset led them to back a political project that promised to slam the brakes on that progress, even if, ironically, it meant voting against their own economic well-being. And that backlash that really got rolling with Nixon, it didn't stop there. Not at all. Let's look at how this impulse was taken, solidified, and really turned into a concrete, decades-long political and economic agenda under the Reagan administration. This was a whole new playbook. Liberal suddenly became a dirty word. The power of unions was deliberately broken. A powerful new alliance was forged with the religious right. Huge tax cuts were given to the wealthiest Americans, and critically, policies were put in place that encouraged manufacturing to move overseas, which really kicked off decades of deindustrialization in America. Now, to really grasp the economic impact of this shift, let's just focus on one number. In 1973, right before these policies really took hold, the top 1% of Americans took home about 8% of the nation's total wealth. Just hang on to that number for a sec, 8%. And here we are today. Look at this. That same top 1% now takes home around 40% of the wealth. This chart perfectly illustrates what the analysis calls the Great Divergence. It shows a massive redirection of wealth away from the broad middle class and straight to the very, very top. And it's presented as a direct consequence of that political shift that started way back as a backlash to social progress. So let's bring this all home. A story about a book in Poland and a political U-turn in 1960s America? What does any of that have to do with our world right now? Well, according to this analysis, everything. So here it is, the bottom line. This analysis points to a clear, recurring pattern. You see a moment of genuine social progress, and it's met with a powerful, organized political backlash. And that backlash doesn't just fade away. It ends up reshaping the entire political landscape for decades to come. And it's this cycle, repeating over and over, that has built the very destination that we're all living in today. Which, of course, leaves us with one last really important question. If our present is a place we arrived at through a series of choices and reactions, then it forces us to look really hard at the choices and reactions happening all around us right now. What destination are we building for the future?